Our life is our biggest design project. Like a design project, our life is full of challenges and opportunities and constraints and criteria in other people to collaborate with. And I thought, my life is my biggest project, and now I have a design process. Let me see if I can apply this process to my life. That idea became like a proof point, both for this hypothesis that our life is a design project, but also for my process. Like, does this process really work with anything? And that's how I started applying design process to my life and design the life you love.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Sparks of Gratitude podcast. I am your host, Randy Sparks, and as you all know, gratitude can change and save lives, and that is the mission that we are trying to share. We bring wonderful guests who can share their triumphs and tragedies and how gratitude has played a part. And today, I am thrilled to invite a wonderful guest, industrial designer and author who's been called one of the most creative people in the world, Ayse Birsel. Welcome to the conversation.
Randy, thank you so much for inviting me.
Well, and Ayse, I'm so inspired by the work you do and the intention that you have. And everybody, just so you know, Ayse is joining us right now from Paris, France.
Exactly.
So we are now international today. You are joining an international conversation, and I'm so thrilled about that. And before we get started, I do want to invite everybody first to thank you so much for listening. We are so grateful for you. And if you have not yet, please tell us that you like the show. Please subscribe to it or leave us a comment. That always helps us get wonderful guests like Ayse. Well, let's get on with the conversation. Ayse, you are on the other side of an ocean from me right now. And what is it like out there? And what is getting you inspired today?
So I'm in Paris, and as Paris usually is, the clouds are gathering for a little light summer rain. And my two daughters are here with me, so that makes it just a lovely place to be. And one of them is going to school here, and the other one is doing her internship here. So that's why I'm in Paris.
Well, I'm excited to hear that. And you have a bit of an international background where I understand your home base is in New York City now, right?
My home base is now actually between Paris and New York.
Okay.
So I'm commuting back and forth.
Okay. Well, and it seems so much easier to commute between Paris and New York, but I'm on the West Coast, and so getting to Paris is a pretty long flight from here. But I love Paris. In fact, my wife, it has a sweet spot in our heart in a couple of ways. One, we are huge tennis fans and have been since I was a child, and it's been something that we love during our marriage. The odd thing is neither of us really play. I played when I was younger, but we're massive tennis fans. And my favorite tournament is Roland Garros. And there's something about the red clay that inspires me. And in 2013, when we were married, we just had this dream that someday we're going to go. And someday we're going to go see the red clay and watch a tournament. And we finally, after 10 years of being married, we made it in 2013. And then we've been a few times since. And it's just has great memories for my wife and myself. So
that's beautiful. I've been to once, so I can relate to that feeling of watching it live.
Yep.
And beautiful.
Yeah, well, and now I'm excited that we kind of get a double dose of Roland Garros this summer because the Olympics are going to be there and they're going to have the tennis tournament there. So we get basically two this year.
That is a good point.
Yeah, we get the French Open and the Olympics all there, which is awesome. So, But you don't come from either Paris or New York. You're originally from Turkey, right?
I'm originally from Turkey, from Izmir.
Okay, that's someplace I have not been, but I'm really impressed by your Ayse. Something I'd like to talk about that I hear you talk about so much is optimism. I've heard you mention that, and that you even admit to yourself that you wake up every morning a pessimist, but you intentionally work on optimism. Could you talk to us a little bit about that?
Sure. You know me well. So I come from a family of lawyers, and I realized at one point that most lawyers are pessimists because they imagine the worst possible scenarios. And my dad was, he was a lawyer, and And I kind of thought, well, I adore my dad, but I want to be an optimist. And I became an industrial designer. And what I love about design and industrial design, particularly, is it's all about problem solving. So even if you start pessimistically, you have the optimism of ideas. And so it's true that I wake up every morning with pessimism and fear, like, will I be able to do what I do today? And I think it's just my nature. Some people are like that. But then I start to use the early morning hours to think creatively, and that gets me out of my pessimism. And I get excited by ideas and I move on. And this is actually what I try to teach people, is how to intentionally get out of the problem state into the optimistic state of solution making.
Well, it's so impressive that you recognize that you wake up every day that way and intentionally go through processes to move from pessimism to optimism. And so you've used yourself as the experiment to learn how to do that through the mind of a designer, and
Always.
then express that and help teach that to other people. So for the listeners, Ayse has written 2 amazing books to help people teach that. And here they are. Let's see if I can get them in the screen. So her first was Design the Life You Love. And look how beautiful the design of the book. In fact, when you go through the book, I recommend everybody get this and go through the whole process, because what you come out with will be amazing. And then her second book was Design the Long Life You Love. And they're just so wonderful. And Ayse, you've talked about the genesis of your first book, Design the Life You Love. Could you tell a little bit about the story of what prompted you to write this, and what was the challenge that this sprung from?
First of all, thank you so much for having my books, and I love like how you held them together. And and I want to, and I will write more books so that next time we speak, you could be like, your hands will be very full.
Oh, I hope so. 1, I hope we can speak again, and 2, I hope my arms can be full of your books, because
I
they're
hope so
they're
too.
so great.
You know, I mentioned my dad, and I want to mention him again. My dad, when I was like in my 20s, he would tell me, Ayse, you need to write a book. In my 30s, Ayse, you need to write a book. In my 40s, same thing. And every time I would tell my dad, I'm a designer, dad, why would I write a book? And he would just say, like, just write a book. So I finally did listen to my dad, and he was right. The ability to express yourself in multiple ways is, in fact, very, very satisfying. And the way I came to it is, I frankly had no intention. But I love designing products, and I've designed, you and your listeners probably sat on something or held something that I designed in your hands, and you didn't even know it, from office systems to potato peelers to toilets. And I thought, that's what I'm going to do forever and ever, until in 2008, the economy crashed. And suddenly all our clients took the work in-house, which I wasn't expecting this at all. I thought this is going to happen to other people, but we're so good, it'll just pass us by. And of course, it made total sense to our clients to basically, we were an external resource to them. So they just crossed that out, and nothing personal. And for the first time in a long, long while, I found myself with nothing to do, and no design, nothing to design, basically. And that was devastating, because I thought, how come, people don't appreciate what I do? You make it immediately about yourself, right? So, and it was one of my dearest friends and collaborators, Leah Kaplan. She and I have worked together since we were kids, quote unquote. But Leah was the person who said to me, look, Ayse, you have all this time in your hands. Why don't you use this time to think about how you think, because you think differently? And that was a lifeline for me. In a moment where I thought, I have nothing to offer to the world, she kind of made me realize that I do something well, and that's to think differently. And I read somewhere that, all you need is one person to believe in you, as long as that person is not your mom. So I was like, okay, Leah believes in me, that's enough for me. And I spent that I was we basically, as a studio, had no work for about 1 year. And I used that year to look for work, but also to think about how I think. And I drew it, which is how I think. I mapped it out, and I realized that based on all my expertise as an industrial designer, that my first step when I faced the white page was to deconstruct my topic. So if it's an office system or a toilet or toothbrush, whatever it is, I started by breaking it into its pieces, trying to understand what this thing entails. And then just by the fact that I was breaking it down into its pieces, one, I started seeing it differently, not as this whole thing, but something made up of different pieces. But I also realized that I was breaking the preconceptions that I had. And then that gets you to think differently about the same things, then allows you to put it back together in a new way. So it's very kind of like systematic and step by step. And then once you put something back together again, understanding that it can go together in different ways, but one of those ways is better than all the others, you can create these permutations. And then you can express that in terms of its form, in terms of its materials. And so that became my methodology, and I called it Deconstruction, Reconstruction. Very straightforward, and a mouthful. And as soon as I did that, I showed it. I had an interview with the folks at GE. GE was at their, height in terms of this amazing business, and they loved processes. I didn't realize it, but I showed them deconstruction, reconstruction, and they said, why don't you deconstruct and reconstruct 5 of our most successful businesses across the value of design for us? And that's the project that got us out of our slump.
Wow. Yeah. Isn't that amazing that you have one person besides your mother that believes in you, and then suddenly that gives you the motivation to get through? I imagine it didn't make it any easier. It just made you have hope and belief.
Yes, it gave me a sense of purpose. And
Yeah.
that's often, I talk today about self-made purpose, and that became my self-made purpose. Up until that point, I had always relied on my clients and projects to have a sense of self and purpose. And that year, with Leah's help, it started coming from inside out. I have a way of thinking that I want to develop into a methodology. And once you develop it, I had done it intuitively up until that point. But once I had it mapped out, kind of refined and simplified, it became something that I could share with others.
That's so great that you describe it that way, that it was intuitively already there and you behaved that way, but it wasn't mapped out or given language. And then you were able to see who you already were, in a sense, and then
Exactly.
could put more power behind that to do more good. Is that fair to say?
I didn't set out for it to be like that. But then what made it like that is my second initiative, which was then to apply deconstruction, reconstruction to my life. And that came from this idea that, again, intuitively, I believed, and now continue to believe, that our life is our biggest design project. And that, like a design project, our life is full of challenges and opportunities and constraints and criteria in other people to collaborate with. And I thought, my life is my biggest project, and now I have a design process. Let me see if I can apply this process to my life. So that idea became like a proof point, both for this hypothesis that our life is a design project, but also for my process. Like, does this process really work with anything? And that's how I started applying design process to my life and developed Design the Life You Love.
Right, and you had proven yourself in designing actual products and solving problems and making things beautiful and functional and useful, deconstructing and reconstructing those, and now you've used your own life as an example of designing something that's not a physical product, but that is your life itself.
Exactly. And, when I first started thinking about that, a friend of mine, Shirley Moulton, she also had just started Academy of Life and about teaching people lessons we don't learn at school. And the two things came together, and Shirley said, well, why don't you teach this? I'll give you a workshop and we can invite people. And so that became my first session. I had never done a workshop, not a design workshop, let alone design the life you love workshop. And I found myself in front of, I think, 10 to 12 people, and I did it. And then I realized that people were drawn to the idea of designing their life just organically. And so once I started telling people, oh, I did this workshop, they wanted to come and try it out. And so it grew word of mouth. And then it was as these people came to the workshops, for me, it was still an experiment and I was enjoying myself. But once I started getting returns from these people who had come to the workshops where, this person would stop me on the street and say, well, your workshop changed my life. Or like I would run into someone and she'd be like, I was at your workshop. It changed my life. And I was like, nobody told me that about like my toilet seat or your potato peeler changed my life. No, I've never heard that, but I was very kind of intrigued. And I do believe that design process is a process of transformation by nature of it. So you transform a product to make it better. And it actually was doing the same thing for life and subsets of life. And so that's what keeps me going. It's those returns, people telling me this works and it helps them be optimists about their life and more intentional and take charge and imagine what the life they love could be.
It's so beautiful to hear that when it seems like you set out for yourself to design your own, and then that framework has now been a gift to so many.
Thank
So
you.
yeah,
Yes.
I love to see that. There is something that I'd love to chat about that you address in the book after deconstruction and reconstruction. So a piece of that is you call it point of view, or
Hmm.
or perspective is kind of getting a new visual of in this whole process. And could you talk a little bit about that, and particularly in how to be creative is permission to be playful, and why that's so important.
Absolutely. So, point of view is our ability to see the same things differently. And really, the heart of design process is imagination. And what is imagination but to think differently and to see the same things differently? And often, I think we all have moments where we'll see something that somebody else has done and think to ourselves, oh, I wish I could have thought of that. And that's point of view, that somebody, you looked at something and you saw, I don't know, you saw a mistake and somebody saw it as an opportunity. Those are the things, how we often hear the story of the post-it, it was never meant to be except for this one engineer who realized that his, the glue that he was developing wasn't truly sticking, but then it had this other use that you could like put it on and take it off, and and so that is the point of view. And so there are tools that I have developed and that's also inherent in design that helps you intentionally think differently about things. But the overarching mood of that, to basically give yourself permission to do that, is being playful, to be able to play with ideas. And really, that's just like being a child. When we're kids, we're not afraid of making mistakes. We play and we learn through play. And I think that thinking like a designer is kind of like being a child, about everything, in not being fearful. So that's what I love about children, is that they'll play without fearing that they're making a mistake. They're just interested. And so the same thing applies to design, and thinking like a designer is being playful and saying, oh, I can do this, I can do that. And even like having bad ideas, or, stupid ideas, because sometimes that's where good ideas come from. You have to get over your preconception that it's only this way. No, there are many different ways, and that's where the playfulness comes into play.
So how do you, or how do you coach people? For me, that's difficult. I think I've lived a life where I was once that child who had no worry about making mistakes, and was playful and had imagination for days. And then throughout my life, I've made mistakes, a whole bunch of them. Turns out I make mistakes, guys. um, and throughout
Welcome to
all,
the club.
right? Well, and what I noticed that does to me is it creates fears in me, that I fear making a mistake. I fear looking foolish in front of people. I fear not getting things perfect. And therefore I freeze and don't create. I don't innovate. And it seems to me totally counterintuitive when I hear you speak, yet in actual practice, I still feel those fears. And so how do I hack into that permission to be playful?
One is just like what you said, is to give yourself permission to be playful. Even remember that you were a child. I think those things are incredibly important and useful. But then there's some specific tools. One, the fact that it's step by step, the process. I don't, I would never ask you, okay, like Randy, now think of your life, the one that you want to live. It's just breaking it down step by step, so that when you're doing it, you're not really worrying about, well, is this the life I want? You're working on pieces of it until it comes together and reveals something for you. So the step by step piece of it is also helpful. Just like, when a child is playing with Legos or construction pieces, you start somewhere and you kind of work through it. Then one of my best techniques is to get people to draw. And drawing, for many of us, is what we did in kindergarten. And we haven't done it since. And I use that intentionally, because it does take you back to that childhood kind of moment of drawing things. And for a lot of people, it's the most difficult thing that they're going to do with my process is, and I'm like, who cares? You draw like Picasso or stick figures, but it's kind of like a signal to your head that you're entering the creative space and playing. And then the last bit, I'll say, all of the tools, whether I'm asking to think about your life in metaphors, or, think about how to turn your challenges into opportunities, or collaborate with each other. These are all part of the play. But one of my favorite tools is what I call wrong thinking. And wrong thinking is all about like come up with the worst possible idea. And that's playful. But then kind of like, how can you take that terrible idea and turn it to your advantage, or turn it into a good idea? And I'll give you a little example. People are incredibly creative once you give yourself permission, and you have a set of tools, right? But for example, a terrible idea is to gossip about your coworkers, right? So how do you turn that into a good idea? Is you could say, well, what if I gossiped about them, but in the best way possible? Like, so I, in their absence, talked about why they're so good at certain things, or, why people appreciate them. And that is taking a terrible idea and turning it into a delightful idea. And so those are the things we use to play.
Well, that's awesome. I'm grateful for that one. I'm going to use that. I love coming up with terrible ideas and having that be the point. So something that you also talk about in Point of View is discovering your values, and why that's so important. And that feeds into your next step, which is after deconstruction, it's reconstruction. And so, and you're your values are the core of all of our life, and our life is built on our values. And so, could you
Right.
talk to me about the importance of of having and discovering what those values are and building our life on the values that matter most?
Well, should we do it together?
Yes, I'd love that. Let's
Okay.
go to work.
Let's go to work. So, to think about our values, often what we do when we're thinking creatively and as designers is to gather inspiration. Because when you gather inspiration, in effect, what you're doing, you're finding solutions in different places. It's just that they haven't come together before. And so, inspiration is a big part of point of view and creativity. And for our values to inspire ourselves, I ask people about their heroes. So
Mm.
now, Randy, I'm going to ask you in the moment, because we're here together and we're playing. So no stress, but think like your 5-year-old self and think about, you know, who is one of your heroes. And you can do this in the context of your life. Like, do you have a life hero who inspires you simply the way they live their life? Or since we're in your podcast, do you have a podcast hero? And just one for now, and maybe you could tell us who that is and what is it about them that you notice?
Okay, so the very first person that came to mind, and this goes back to the beginning of this conversation when I told you that why Paris is so special to me is because attending Roland Garros in the French Open, and Rafael Nadal is my favorite tennis player.
Yay!
And I admire him so much. And there are so many things where I do see him as a hero to me.
So could you share some of his qualities that you notice and you admire?
Yes, I see equal parts kindness and grace and fierce discipline and love and loyalty.
Yeah, beautiful. See, you're a good player. It, you jump in and play with me in the moment. But I would say, Randy, that what you see in Nadal, I'll turn them back to you and say, you're kind, you have grace, you have fierce discipline, love, and loyalty, and that these are your values. And they are, even though, you know, we just met for this podcast, I know that I'm right. that
Well, you're going to make me cry, Ayse. I have to say, when I hear somebody say those things back at me, it's emotional.
It is emotional. So thank you for saying that. And this is really the heart of designing your life is connecting or reconnecting with your values because they're the foundation of your life design and or design simply because it's your values that allow you to make choices. And often in moments of difficulty or challenge, we're lost and we don't quite know what our values are. And it's a hard question to answer in general anyway. So I realized as I was developing my program that if I ask people about their heroes, in fact, what they notice in other people is their own values. That's why they're attracted to these qualities. And I could tell you, Randy, that if somebody else had Nadal as their hero, 100% guaranteed that they're not going to necessarily see the same things you see in him. They might say, oh, he's very competitive, you know, he's very hardworking, or, you know, so this is very much about you. And those are beautiful values. So, and they are the gist of your podcast as well. So, no surprise.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for taking me through that exercise and helping me. I've gone through many different types of exercises of uncovering and defining what my values are. And but I've never had anybody approach it the same way you just have.
Yeah.
And
So,
even though now looking backwards, it seems obvious, but in the moment, I felt like I was just describing somebody that I admire. And then you flipped it. And it's beautiful.
and the beauty of it for your listeners, if they want to try this, even though they've heard it, right?
Mm-hmm.
I would recommend that they try it because you can trick your brain and we forget. You know, Randy, you could do this again in a year's time. And even though you kind of know, it's what's important is, again, seeing your hero, right? And I also want to say, you know, you were asking me about point of view, and I'm so glad you asked about values, because you reminded me something that I've been working on recently is I'm always trying to understand why design is transformational. What I know it's transformational, but why? You know, why? And so I go deeper and deeper. And so last year I realized that in fact what design does is it tricks our brains. It tricks us, but for our own good. And the way I realized this is because I do karate. In last year, I got my black belt, and my karate sensei, Levent Surman, he told me, okay, now that you know you have your first black belt, I'm going to teach you some things, you know, at that level. And one of them is called a feint. And he said, feint is basically you trick your opponent. You pull their attention here, and while their attention is there, you go and attack them, you know, there. And I thought, in that moment, Randy, I thought, okay, that's what we do as designers. And that's what the heroes exercise just did for you, is it pulled your attention to your heroes. And while you were thinking about your heroes, you were actually kind of telling what your values are. And the whole design methodology is full of examples of tricking our brains, because we have so many preconceptions. Our education teaches us all these shortcuts, so that if you see this and that, you're like, okay, well, 1 + 1 = 2. You know, it's just constant like shortcuts. And all these tools about point of view are actually developed and I realized this after many years of designing. The real purpose is to trick your brain so that you can truly think creatively and leave your preconceptions behind. So I tricked you, but it was for your own good.
There you go. Well, the magician is always doing the trick right in front of you. So you are a magician and a black belt. My goodness, congratulations on your black belt. And also, I mean, as much as I think that is probably a physical achievement, the mental achievement and the things that you learn and notice in application to life and discipline, obviously from that example you noticed, are probably infinite. So
oh yes, and I would recommend all your listeners to do something like that. I mean, we started this conversation by talking about my fears. I know I'm not the only one. And in an interesting way, karate teaches me how to be courageous and to get over my fears. I learned karate very late in life. It was because I had kids. I wanted them to learn karate. They didn't, but I fell in love with it. And what's so interesting is the lessons that you learn in karate can be applied to designing your life. It's a step-by-step way of developing mastery, and it never is fully developed. So it makes you very humble, and every day you have to work at it. And yes, you know, there are some levels you get to a black belt, but then, you know, there's a next black belt, there's a next black belt, and you just refine and refine. And I often think that's what life is like. You know, you're never done. You're always learning. You're always a beginner, and so that you're absolutely right. The short answer is yes, karate.
Well, I'm glad you gave the long answer, because you're describing that life is always aiming at the horizon, and we're going to hit milestones along the way, but the horizon is always off in the distance. And so we're always moving forward to something beautiful and greater and better. And tomorrow be a better version of myself. And something I've been practicing recently, actually, this kind of stemmed from a conversation I had with our mutual friend, Chester Elton, but that led me on a line of thinking later, which was he talked about an exercise that actually Marshall Goldsmith talks about. And I know you have fondness for him as well, about writing 2 letters, a letter of gratitude to my younger self. And in doing that, I can look backwards and really see how much that younger version of me has sacrificed and all the work that's been done to create who I am now, and to give myself the permission to express that gratitude to my younger self for that, and then write another letter to my future self. And this concept of past and future self to me is really impactful. Of I have a future self that is my biggest cheerleader, cheering me on. And I am the one investing and making the sacrifices now for that future version of me. And as you talk about deconstruction and step by step, one of the things that I'm implementing right now is, what is one thing I can do today that tomorrow I will be grateful that I did? So it's not this horizon unreachable thing. It's not how you described the Lego. It's just one Lego at a time. It's not, I have to finish a massive project that seems unsurmountable. But what's one thing I can do right now that tomorrow I'll be grateful for, and
Those are
stack that
beautiful.
up over time?
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I love the idea of the writing a letter to your younger self and older self. I'm gonna try that.
Yeah, I love that exercise of gratitude. Now, something I'm going to pivot on that point. Obviously, this is the Sparks of Gratitude podcast, people. No secret that we're talking about how gratitude fits into everything. Especially, I notice in Design the Long Life You Love, almost the majority of that book, it references important people that were impactful to you, who've taught wonderful lessons. And to me, I saw that as a letter of gratitude to heroes in your life that
Thank you
that
so
you
much.
and so
You've really expressed it in a way that I guess I think about but don't talk about. So thank you.
well, and so I'd love if you wouldn't mind. Now, this is, I don't mean to set it up because you can't share about everybody in here, but maybe share about some of the people who have inspired you along the way
Mhm.
that you are grateful for.
So, The Long Life You Love book, Design the Long Life You Love, is based on a year-long research we did with people who are older, so 65 and older. And we traveled the United States from the East Coast to the West Coast down to Mississippi. And we invited people to come be a designer for us for a day and design long life, whether it was their life, love life, friendships, finances, well being, you name it. And we learned enormously from these wise people that we call astronauts of long life because they're going where no one has gone before. And so, the book is a big love letter to them for all the things that they've taught us, and with the intention to share those lessons for both younger audiences. So my daughters are 19 and 20. And I thought if they could start to learn these lessons early on, wouldn't that be amazing? But also people in their 30s, 40s, people who are in midlife, 50s, and then people who are in their 60s, 70s, 80s. So it's really lessons about love, purpose, well-being, and friendship, the four pillars of life. And it made me realize, you were talking about gratitude. I grew up in Turkey and we revere our elders. So it's also a love letter to all my elders, from my parents to my uncles and aunts, my grandparents, in realizing that they've taught me so much. And it's funny because I came to the States because I wanted to get away from all that and be my own person. And the States was incredibly generous in that way. Like I became a designer very young, got worked on these amazing projects. So because the American culture reveres its young, so it gives them a lot of opportunities as long as you're hardworking, so that. And now I'm at a place where I realize it's really the intersection of both things, that you need both. You need both the young and the older, wiser people. And in that combination is unbeatable. So, and the book is a reflection of that, really.
Well, it's so great, and I think you honor those people that have inspired you in such a sweet way to share that wisdom of these are people who have gone before us, who have experienced something and have something to say of value. And you
Yeah.
give a voice to that. It's so wonderful. And I'm sure there are many people who are also grateful for that.
Thank you.
And then there's also something funny about this that I heard you say. So everybody, if you're still listening, thank you again for listening. This is wonderful. Like and subscribe. We love you all. But please look up these books and buy them. One of the funny things that Ayse said is she's given a few TED Talks over the years. I've watched them both, and they're inspiring and fun, and you can learn more about these. But you talked about when you released the Design the Long Life You Love, how that showed up on a bestseller list and in a certain category
Oh,
that
yes.
maybe you didn't expect.
Yes. It was a bestseller in the love category. And I thought, wow, yeah.
Right, not the design
Not
category
the
or the
design
self.
category, not long life, but love. And in a way, it also made perfect sense
Yeah.
because I think at our essence, we we try to be love and teach love and
Hmm.
learn love. So I was like, at first I was like, what? This is not a romance book. And then I thought, okay, this is actually a beautiful message. It is a book of love.
Yeah. Well, I think that I would agree with that. And maybe you were surprised and laughed a little bit when that happened, but then it seems like it became absolutely clear. You're like, this actually is a book about love, and love
Yeah.
isn't romance. Love is so much deeper than that. Love goes through when things are difficult and challenging. And to me, I feel like you've said some things in this conversation about finding your own internal purpose, and that's what gives you the strength to endure the challenges that come. And I think love is that as well. When I have my core values and my deep individual purpose, that's where I find the strength to get through something that might seem impassable. And that happens even in my own marriage. I've been married for 20 years, and I'll tell you, it's the greatest achievement I have in my life is being married to a wonderful woman. And that's been 20 years of joy and wonder and challenge and heartbreak, all of it. And it's the best thing that I've ever had.
That's so beautiful, and I couldn't agree with you more. It's you know, I've been married 20 years as well, and and it's I mean, it's like a design project. So it has both the most incredible opportunities and love and laughter, and then it has these incredible challenges and constraints. And to you know it's like again, going back to the being a black belt. Do you and I are probably a black belt in being married, and but it just goes on and on. So
Yeah, we're the first degree, but we're working on the second.
yeah. But how beautiful that you recognize the couple that you are, and I it's rare and it's beautiful.
Well, Ayse, I'm so grateful that you from across an ocean on another continent decided to share a few minutes of your time with me and my listeners today and be part of this conversation. My goal is to have an ongoing conversation about how to make myself better, give a gift of gratitude to other people so they can become a better version of themselves, and that ripple effect can impact somebody else. I think that it changes and saves lives, and I've observed that you do that. And I'm so thankful for you. And I do hope we can have another conversation again like this. This is wonderful. I wish you the
Thank
very
you.
best. And everybody, please, again, look up Ayse. I'm going to put links where you can find both of her books and to find her, watch her TED Talks, and design the life that you love and then live it. So thank
That's
you, Ayse, for
beautiful.
joining us.
Thank you, Randy. And I was thinking of your listeners and if they'd like to be connected to me. I have a newsletter that I send out every Monday, and they can subscribe to that at aysebirsel.com/newsletter.
Okay, I'll put that in the description so everybody can do that. In fact, myself, I'll be the first one to jump on that. So
Yes.
yes, Ayse, thanks you. Thank you for
Thank you.
changing the world. Thank you for being amazing. And we will talk soon. Thank you
Thank you
everyone for
for
listening.
inviting me.
Bye-bye.